and CUNY Law School alone. That is where she learned her true advocacy, at CUNY Law School. Assemblymember Cruz and her staff, again, were instrumental in making this possible. Some of you know I spent before coming here, I was at the U.S. Department of Justice, and what New York is leading on is exactly what we want people to do, and you all will be the models for the rest of the country about how to do this right. So they built a coalition of community-based organizations, unions, industry, and other stakeholders to advance the passage of this signature piece of legislation. And they continue to work tirelessly, as you see today, to ensure that it is implemented faithfully and successfully. For 6 decades, John Jay has worked for institutional, structural, and personal transformation through education and research. And our Institute for Justice and Opportunity, led by Andre Ward, is a key partner in this work in eliminating barriers for success for people who've been involved in our criminal legal system. We debate whether to say criminal justice system, criminal legal system. I still try to say criminal justice system because I am still hopeful that it will one day be just. And it's laws like this that will help us have a system that's just. And I also want to acknowledge Crystal Rodriguez, who's here from the John Jay's Data Collaborative for Justice, which leads critical research in this area, because what you'll hear sometimes is people will distort the facts about what this means and what the impact is, but because of her work and the Data Collaborative for Justice's work, we're going to make sure that the real story gets out. Now, I've got a lot of other remarks, but I'm not going to say them, because it's more important for you to hear from this group of folks, the real experts on this, who are leading this work. And again, I thank all of you all for coming. I see it's being recorded so that we can continue to share this important information. But if you don't remember anything, remember the Institute for Justice and Opportunity. We are here to support people who want to take advantage of the clean slate. And Crystal Rodriguez, who's here with the Data Collaborative for Justice, who will be assessing the effectiveness of this so that we have data to inform how successful this law will be. So thank you.
I do the same mistake often, President Mason, if I still call it legislation, because it sometimes feels unreal. It took us so long to get it done, and it's such a transformative change in the way we create legislation, the way that we actually got this done. In what universe did you ever think that you'd have unions, clergy, the construction industry, like the actual developers, and advocates and elected officials all on the same page about something? Like, that's unheard of. And it's, I think, a testament, I will be honest, not to my work, to your work, and to the work of the advocates who put real life people in front of interest groups, because they're all, different type of interests, but they're interest groups, to say this is who we are, this is what we need, and this is how it's going to change our lives. And I always refer back to, I think for me, one of the most powerful things we ever saw when we used to come up here, when you guys used to come up here, was when you guys brought the children of formerly incarcerated folks who were saying, my parents just need a chance so that they can provide for me, so that in a few years it isn't me who's forced into this because I don't have any other choice, or because the community has left my parents or me without a choice. And now they have that. And I think it's going to be, once we actually start seeing the impact, because the science is there and we've seen it in other states how it works, I think folks are going to turn around and tell us we were right all along. And frankly, even before that, because I think you're going to hear, and I'm going to introduce folks, this gentleman right here, he's been doing clean slate and opportunities way before we actually even created the word. So let's get us started. I'm going to read a little bit about each of them, and then we're going to get started with questions, and there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. Let me just put this over here. Crystal Rodriguez, she is the Policy Director and Data Collaborative for Justice over at John Jay, right? She leads research initiatives analyzing the impact of criminal justice policies on communities. She recently moderated a plan on bail reform and public safety, highlighting her expertise on policy and analysis. Andre Ward, raise your hand so that folks know who you are. Executive Director of John Jay College Institute of Justice and Opportunity. He advocates for educational and policy changes to empower formerly incarcerated individuals. His personal journey from incarceration to leadership informs his commitment to social justice. Paul Zuber, who has been, I will say, one of the biggest champions on this issue around the state. He is the executive vice president of the Business Council of New York. He brings extensive experience in government affairs, focusing on economic development, labor issues, and frankly, social justice. And I think Paul understands the impact of when you do things right and how it actually changes the economics of a household and of a community. And he's worked closely with New York State Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus on many initiatives, including Clean Slate. Then we have Donald. Donald, raise your hand. Donald Nesbitt, he is the chair of DC 37's Political Action Committee, executive vice president of Local 372, and if his face is familiar to you, it's because Donald has been one of the loudest voices on labor around Clean Slate. It has basically been at every rally, at every workshop, because he wants to make sure that the word is out there. And then we have Trent Griffin Braff, who is the CEO and founder of Roadmap to Success program. He recognized as the 2023 SBA Upstate New York Small Business Person of the Year, and is actually where I met him. For his, no, actually that's not the one I mentioned this year. Last year, for his innovative business strategies, he's received a lot of awards for his work, that's why. And during his 12 years in incarceration for a nonviolent drug offense, he dedicated himself to personal growth and education, laying the foundation for his future success, which you'll hear about. So now we're gonna get started with the questions. So my first question is for the lady, for Crystal. And I don't know, do we have a regular microphone? They didn't, so Crystal. Because I want to make sure that this, they're not, yeah.
Is it easier if I pull them?
No, because then it'll be weird. Yeah, Crystal, just, because I want to make sure that they can hear you. They didn't give us another one, so. I'll shout it. Can you guys hear me? Yes. For me, it's more important that you hear from her than from me. Crystal, yes. What does the data tell us about the long-term impact of criminal records on employment, housing, and economic stability?
Okay, so thank you so much for having me first, and happy birthday again.
Thank you.
So we at the Data Collaborative for Justice put together a report in order to look at how many people in New York State were likely carrying a criminal conviction. Now we know that generally criminal convictions have impacts on people's ability to obtain and maintain housing, employment, obtain professional licenses, right? And what we did was we along with others prepared reports to sort of estimate what the benefit would be if individuals had the ability to remove that from their history. And thanks to the Brennan Center, they actually did a more looking at the economical benefits of, or rather some of the disadvantages of having a criminal conviction on your record. And one thing they found, looking specifically at New York State, was that for individuals who had a misdemeanor conviction, where their most serious offense on their record was a misdemeanor, their annual earnings were reduced by about 15%. Now, for those whose most serious felony conviction was a felony, their annual earnings were reduced by about 20%. So just imagine whatever that number could be for an average family in New York State. That is a significant change in their ability to support their families on a daily basis, pay their rent, do their groceries, access extracurricular activities, right? The things that we hope at a minimum families in New York State can provide. Now, but for anyone who also had a jail or prison sentence attached to their conviction, their annual earnings were reduced by 52%, right? I mean, I think that it's shocking to hear that, right? And I want to also note that they looked at people who were like similarly situated, so individuals who otherwise could have been earning far more. This is 52% below their peers, right? Another note I want to highlight is that our New York City Comptroller did a report and estimated that if individuals did not have these criminal convictions that were impeding their ability to gain better housing or better employment, that wages would likely increase by about $2.4 billion across the city, right? That's among all the individuals in New York City who are otherwise being disadvantaged by having this criminal history. And another note that I want to highlight in terms of the data because I think it gives us an idea of like the size and breadth of the number of people who are impacted, is that we looked at for about 1980 to about 2020, so this is a long 40-year time span. There were 2.2 million people in New York State who had a criminal conviction. So consider that number of people and multiply that with the kinds of earning reductions and losses that we're talking about. And that's why this law goes such a long way in addressing social justice more broadly, right? It's not just about a criminal justice reform, but it's really doing something to shift some of the economic imbalances that we see in so many of our communities. And I don't want to take too. So
if you're going over time, you see her right there.
Thank you. Oh, that's so helpful. I'm so glad to hear.
Gabby will raise. You'll see it on her phone. She has one of those.
Perfect. And I just, I throw out these numbers, but I think what's really important is to note that what this legislation, what this law allows for is to end these penalties and punishments that outlines court procedures, right? So if we want to give credence and want to believe in what our justice system does, whatever your opinion is about it generally, I think it's important that we're able to give people true opportunities to not just reintegrate, but succeed in our communities and return with dignity. That's really what this ultimately is about. I also want to note that there is disparate treatment between Black people and everyone else within our state, particularly with regard to convictions. It's what some studies have shown is that when it comes to job prospects, there are far fewer opportunities available. If you have a criminal conviction on your record, and you're a Black person, you're far less likely to even receive a callback, right? In the interview and job seeking process. We also know that stability is cumulative. The more people are able to establish stability in the immediate years after conviction or after release from incarceration, the more likely they're able to sustain it going into the future. And obviously housing and employment are necessary stability factors, right? That's also been proven in many cities across the country. So I'll leave it there.
Perfect, thank you. So to make sure that everybody can be heard, we're gonna play musical chairs. So the next person that I'm gonna ask the question is for Andre. So Andre, we can switch around.
Do we need it? We need
I mean, if you wanna try.
I think my voice
Can you know?
Can you hear me back there?
No, Andre, use the mic.
Yeah, Andre, I know. I know, baby. You know?
All right.
We got this. We make do.
That's my
We make do. There you go. So I'm gonna use my courtroom voice. There you go. You'll need it, not me. So the next question's for Andre. What are the most common misunderstandings and misconceptions about Clean Slate, and how do they impact the public trust and employers' attitudes?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest misconceptions as it relates to Clean Slate is that people feel that there's an immediate and unrestricted expungement that happens with Clean Slate, and that's just not the case. When we look at the research, Chung mentioned in 2020 that when we think about Clean Slate, it's carefully structured. It's not something that just was put together in some hodgepodge kind of way. We know, in fact, that unrestricted expungement is not happening. Right? We realize the importance of that. And how it diminishes public trust is the more people begin to start thinking about something being unrestricted, right? It diminishes support for that thing. And so that's why this law, and I'm glad you prefaced by saying the law now, that's why this law is so incredibly important. And the more we continue to put forth this law in a way that informs other people, the greater success we'll have in moving this stuff along and creating opportunities for people. I'll stop there.
Awesome, thank you. Paul, your turn for the musical chairs.
I was waiting for the 1 minute sign.
Well, sometimes the truth is so simple, you don't need the whole 5 minutes. But one of the biggest misconceptions, and actually let me add something to that. I think I'll add to the misconceptions because we've heard it all. We've heard this is allowing criminals to go free. This is going to make the community less safe. This is just rewarding people. And the reality, the actual real truth is that this is not some sort of reward. By the time someone qualifies for clean slate, they've gone through the criminal justice system where they've faced their day in court. They've been told what their punishment for the crime that they've been accused of is. They've paid their dues. That means they've either gone to prison, or there has been parole, or there has been some sort of other punishment imposed by the court, and the person has actually completed that entire process, and some time has passed by. If your crime was a misdemeanor, it's 3 years. If your crime was a felony, it's 8 years. So this isn't some sort of free-for-all, as some folks would like the universe and people to believe. It's also not the kind of thing that makes communities less safe. We were very we were very deliberate in making sure that we had the voices of impacted individuals, but that we also listened to folks who may have different opinions, even if we thought the opinions were not the correct ones. Sorry guys, by the elevator, we're doing a workshop here. Can you lower your voices? Thank you. And so, Jamie, can you stand by there so that folks are a little bit less loud? Thank you. And I'm sure a friend from the news will edit that part out. And then the other piece that I think is critical is that certain law enforcement entities, for the purposes of law enforcement, can still access these records. So it's not expunged and it goes away. It's sealed and keeps the community safe, and it allows law enforcement to still do their job and for people to really have that second chance. So I wanted to add those two pieces in there. Paul, my question for you. Which industries are most impacted by Clean Slate, and how are these businesses adapting to their hiring practices in response?
All right, thank you. Just if I can add one thing, I think the words that the Assemblywoman spoke are very important, because in this day and time, we have to be careful with our words, right? Because people will take things and they will turn them and they'll control the narrative, right? And so what I've always reminded people about this isn't a criminal justice bill, it's an economic development bill. And we have to think about it as an economic development bill. And we also have to remember we're not giving anything to anybody. We're giving them an opportunity. You as an individual still have to get the job. But what we're saying is we're giving you a chance to have that opportunity to get a job. Now, when you look at the industries that are most impacted by this, I think one of the important things that happened during Clean Slate, and it was actually one of the positive, is there were a lot of companies out there that were part of what they call the Second Chance Initiative. So you had banks, you had retail, you had construction. They were all part of this initiative. It was, something that they did on their own, right? So all this data came out of the Second Chance Initiative. It showed that formerly incarcerated tended to be more dependable employees than others. It showed that costs for employers went down. So I think when you look at the industries in New York State, there's two things you have to remember. One is New York State has a workforce shortage. There are about 450,000 unfulfilled jobs in New York State. So we need the workforce, right? And now from a business perspective, one of the biggest costs to an employer is finding that employee and keeping that employee. Because if you think about it, when you lose an employee, you now have to take another employee to handle the employee who's left job. So you have that individual almost doing two jobs, and that individual has to train someone else. So now all of a sudden your costs go up as a business. So I think, with this particular piece of legislation, you'll probably find most in retail and construction in terms of those industries, but you'll also find folks in banking. As far as HR is concerned, I think one of the big things that we've done at the Business Council is we have an HR director. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to reach out to all our members. We have 3,400 members, and make him open and available for questions. And I think most HR departments are pretty good. They just want to know what the law says, and then they'll abide by the law. I think the biggest challenge is actually going to be us as a society, as a community, in making sure that our formerly incarcerated men and women understand the process of getting a job, understand what it means to go to an interview, understand what it means to present yourself in the best way, to not let all those things that were in your head from being, incarcerated or not feeling part of the system impact your ability to get jobs. I think once we also do that, we'll be in a much stronger place. But you're seeing the impacts, and you will see the impacts from this law because of the fact that we have such a large workforce development issue, because of the costs, and the data that's come out of the Second Chance Initiative has proven time and time again that this is actually a positive for businesses.
Thank you. And our next question is for Donald. And I highly appreciate everybody's willingness to work through the lack of portable mic and make sure that everybody can hear. So Donald, our friend from labor, from the perspective of labor, what role do unions play in ensuring that Clean Slate creates equitable employment opportunities for justice-involved individuals?
So I want to begin by thanking you for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. As you mentioned earlier, we have been taking this show on the road. Folks, so labor's responsibility in all of this. For one, as a labor organization, we don't forget that our members live and experience these things in their own communities. And just because you're a city worker or a state employee or government employee doesn't mean that your family is immune from some of these injustices in our society. One of the things that we say in labor always is injustice to one is injustice to all, right? So if there's an injustice anywhere in our society, we have an obligation to be a part of the solution. It is in that same spirit or belief that labor rights and civil rights are not separate and apart, but they are one. It's our obligation to ensure that there's equitable opportunities for all to receive jobs. When we look at what the Clean Slate Act actually did, what were folks who were advocating, the formerly incarcerated, who were advocating for this bill to pass and become law as it has? They were fighting for housing, for education, for employment.
For a chance.
For a chance, right?
For a chance.
Same thing that the labor movement fights for, right? We are no different. The right to equal pay should not be for some, but should be for all. The workplace, a workplace free of discrimination. That doesn't start when you're in the workplace. That starts when you're filling out the job application. The right to dignity. The stories from the first panel that I was on, the stories that I would hear from folks who say, I've been home 20 years, and I can't even fill out an application, or I get a job, I'm an excellent employee on the job, and when I fill out for a promotion, they run a background check and then I lose my job. These things, from a labor perspective, these are the things that we fight and the injustices that we fight. And so we have an obligation to be a voice and to be a part of this. And also knowing that there's an estimate of across the state, if we do the numbers, there's about $7 to $8 billion that we can put back into the economy of New York State. Just think about what we can do with $7 to $8 billion in the state. Some of the things on the federal level right now that are being threatened to be taken away, and I commend you for the work that's going to continue to be done. But yeah, just think about that type of money that we can put back into education and into programs and do some of the prevention, right, on the front end with our children in preventing them from going down that path.
Thank you. Well, we get Trent to the next musical seat, Chair. I want to tell the story of a DC 37 member that I met during a Clean Slate rally. And I think I've told you guys the story because you guys have been on many of the workshops we do together. And I want to tell the story because I think it's important to understand if folks who have been formerly incarcerated are everywhere. You're not, and sometimes you don't even know who it is. This gentleman, I give him my card because he's like, oh, I'd love to talk to you after the rally. He emails me and tells me he works at one of the DEP plants. He works keeping our water safe. He's actually part of the tech team. I can't remember what the actual title is. And he proceeds to tell me a story. He's now a grandfather, so imagine how long ago this was. He is a grandfather, owns his own house, actually owns 2 houses. His daughter is in college. He is trying to move forward. The reason why he needed to figure out the whole process of clean slate was because of his immigration status. Ultimately, his solution wasn't clean slate, but this isn't about that solution. We did get him a solution, by the way. It was because the kind of people who would benefit from clean slate, you can't imagine where you're gonna find them. And so he came to us looking for an opportunity to actually fix his record so that he could reapply for permanent residency and so that he could become a citizen, because when he was about 20 years old, he was found guilty of a crime. He went to prison. He lost his green card as a result and has been in a limbo for the last 20 years, even though he's a contributing member of our community. And so we were able, with the help of the local DAs, to get his case replayed, and that actually allowed him, thankfully it was before this administration, that allowed him to reapply for his green card, and now he's in the process to become a citizen, and he's a DC 37 member. So I say those stories because it's important for people to know that our formerly incarcerated folks are everywhere. And the second story I'll tell before I pass it on to you is the day Clean Slate passed, I had about 5 different members of our staff, and I don't mean my staff, but like the staff in the legislature, come up to me and tell me that it was either gonna benefit them directly or gonna benefit their kid or someone they love. And these are folks that you would have never guessed it. And the opposition to this law would like to paint everyone with a brush of, you are an undeserving person. And we all know what that brush is. It's usually a brush of color. And I will tell you, of those 5 people, not everybody was a member of color. So just know that. And I say that because I want us all to know that the injustice system can touch all of our lives, no matter how much money you make, the color of your skin, and everyone deserves that second chance.
All right. So my question for you, Trent, based on your experience, what immediate effects do you anticipate Clean Slate will have on the justice-involved individuals seeking employment? But please first, tell us a little bit about the work you do.
All right. Well, first off, thank you for having me. Some of the work we do at the Roadmap to, through the Roadmap to Success programming that we have, is we actually help, we go into prisons, we go into youth detention centers, we work with justice-impacted individuals, teaching them skills so they could go from entry-level roles to leadership roles within employment spaces. Last year we graduated 70 individuals out of our program in docs, and we helped over 40 of them with job placements, 5 of which individuals actually went into management roles. And so it's showing that it's working. On the flip side of that, to Paul's point, we actually go in and we train employers. So the success that I've had through business allowed me the opportunity to build relationships with a lot of decision makers in the employment space. They value my voice, and so they allow me to come in and work with their frontline management teams, teaching them how to have success with the populations. And then we try our best to pair the 2 worlds together so they can both have success together. So that's what we're doing through the Success Map initiative. And now to your question.
Mike, I'll repeat my question. 2 seconds. Based on your experience, what immediate effects do you anticipate Clean Slate will have on justice-involved individuals seeking employment and stability?
So I think it's kind of threefold in my opinion. Kind of piggybacking a little bit what Andre mentioned, that it's not an immediate thing where, you know, someone coming home, their record is just gone or sealed and just eliminated. And so I think the 3-part way I look at it is I think it's gonna have an economic and workforce development, a workforce effect, basically removing some of the biggest barriers from the employment aspect, especially as employers start to learn more and more about the initiative. I think what it would be able to do is kind of remove some of those bias and stigmas that are historically have been barriers for employment. And so I think that's one avenue. I also think that from a reentry and stability avenue, I think that it actually will give individuals a little bit more confidence, I guess I would say. Because I think in a lot of times, I think to go back to Paul's point, when we talk about individuals coming back into the workforce, I think sometimes we lack some of that confidence when we go into the interviewing rooms. We don't know how to talk too good about transferable skills and things of that nature. And so I think that individuals will actually be able to see themselves in these positions with this new law that is in place.
Thank you. And Crystal, if I can have you to the hot seat. And I think that last part is very important. It's one of the reasons why we are why we're teaming up with entities like John Jay to let folks know before they leave or as soon as they leave. And I see, many of the organizations are going to work with us on that because I think this gives people hope. If you come out and you know that if you don't reoffend, that in a few years you have the chance to actually have a better life, I think that goes a long way with giving people something to look forward to, some hope, an incentive to make sure that they are going to their programs, they're getting their education, and they're staying out of trouble. Crystal, my question for you, how have justice involved individuals in states with clean slate policies? Because I will tell you, there's many, including some red states. How have they been impacted, and in what ways have these policies influenced employment, housing, economic stability in those states?
So I will say that, for one, right, for decades now, right, there's been expungement laws across the country in different states. Now, I think what's new into the movement is there being automatic sealing and automatic expungement of records based on timeframes of certain charge eligibility. There's been general studies out of different states that show that individuals were able to more quickly access jobs after their convictions. They were able to retain jobs over longer periods of time, and even employers have reported that they were able to retain employees for longer, in part because people who were getting these new jobs were interested in maintaining stability and maintaining their forward trajectory, right? So they were more likely to stay in positions for longer periods of time. I would say that some things that some things that we can learn from a lot of what the other states have done is already in the works, is already being implemented. Again, having an automatic way to do record clearance, having a clear list of offenses. I think when we look at, I'm looking specifically at the states where we see automatic expungement. This really started in 2018 with Pennsylvania, right? So they're the first state to institute something that required an automatic expungement of people's records. And what we learned is that when we look at the data set of cases, and I shouldn't say the Urban Justice Center actually did a study evaluating Pennsylvania's automatic sealing law. And what they found was they saw that diversion cases, so folks who directly engage with rehabilitation programming, essentially, like the alternatives to detention, alternatives to incarceration that so many of us are familiar with, their cases within the people whose convictions were still coming up dropped to zero. Right, so what that tells us is that whatever Pennsylvania did in the law, the way they implemented it, was that they made sure that the individuals were getting their cases resolved in a way with non-criminal dispositions after having engaged in rehabilitation programming, so that they would get a more immediate sealing. So for New York's law, what does that mean, right? We know that for felonies, they'll be sealed after 8 years. Misdemeanors after 3 years. But when we think about how to ensure that individuals who are coming through the system gain the maximum benefit, and we're looking at alternatives to incarceration, we also need to consider how those cases are being resolved at the end, as opposed to having someone carry a felony conviction, having to wait 8 years, and still engaging in a ton of treatment. And we know that these treatment mandates within our state can be very long, right? There's folks who are pending in courts for 2 or 3 years, engaging in substance use and other types of programming. I want to say I think another kind of thing that we can learn from other states is that Utah has an explicit permission to individuals by state law. They can represent that the underlying conduct did not happen, right? And I think that clarity is important because I think where the implementation of those laws is really going to be tested is in those day-to-day interactions, right? Like the things that we may not be able to see in the quantitative data, but if someone walks into an interview and is immediately asked, well, have you ever been convicted of something? I think it's, people need to have very clear guidance on what they can do and say in those situations so that the law isn't sort of subverted unintentionally, right? Just because an employer comes out and asks a question. That's what, going to Paul's point and others who have raised, like educating and making sure that employees are included in the development and the conversations around the statute to make sure that we are putting people in the best possible place and position once they go into those job interviews.
Thank you. Andre, you're next. What programs are available to help justice-involved individuals gain licenses and education to pursue new opportunities?
All the organizations that's in here? Oh, no, there are many organizations that are offering support for people to access license, etc. At the Institute for Justice and Opportunity, we support people with accessing higher education in addition to connecting them with employment opportunities where licenses may be required. Other organizations do the same. I see we have Rob DeLeon here, the Deputy CEO from Fortune. We have Tanya Pierce here, who's the executive from Lifelong Bolton on the federal side. I see folk from CCA in here, if I'm not mistaken. Right, so there are many different organizations in New York City and New York State that support people with these opportunities. One of the major challenges is, however, that there's not a lot of buy-in and support from the people that we need to support it. And this is why this legislation is critically important, this law is critically important because as we continue to advance this work, we'll get stakeholders to be involved. So there are many different organizations, some of them, and the Institute is one, and many of the others that I just mentioned.
Thank you. Paul, your turn. From a business perspective, I love it. It's like, when you go to the family baby shower, this is it. We're playing the musical chairs. From a business perspective, how has clean slate law, team, you guys were legislation, impacted hiring practices, workforce development, and employer confidence in New York and other states where it has been implemented?
Well, I think obviously in New York, it's passed, it's been signed, but it really hasn't been in effect, right? So New York is still an open question, but it goes back to what I said earlier. There is a lot of data out there about what the impacts are. So, interestingly enough, one of the leading groups that have written a lot about it and given data is the U.S. Chamber. Now, I always used to tell this to the Republican members. They know perfectly well that the U.S. Chamber is not the most progressive group in God's creation, right? So if the U.S. Chamber is telling you that there is something important, something significant to our businesses, to our economy, by giving people that second chance, it is something that we all need to listen to. Some of the data that came out of their study, 85% of HR leaders say second chance hires perform same or better than other employees. 81% of business leaders who say that second chance hires perform the same or better than others. So the data's out there. It shows that this works. Now, I think, to kind of take this question to a different course, what can we as business in New York do to kind of move this forward? What can we do to make this even more impactful? One of the things that we're doing right now is, and I'm going to make a little plug, we're supporting a bill called the Workforce Opportunity Tax Credit. On a federal level, businesses can get a tax credit when they hire people who are on TANF, SNAP, veterans, formerly incarcerated, right? So what we've tried to do is kind of supersize that in New York to give businesses more of an incentive to really go after that community, right? Rather than just putting an ad in a paper saying job available and people showing up, really to give them incentive to go into, areas or go into groups that are dealing with formerly incarcerated or dealing with different groups to make sure that they reach them and they give them the opportunity for those jobs. So I think that's the next important step. Again, we're trying to figure out now like what the ultimate impact will be. But I think when you look at the other states and you look at the data that's out there, it's very clear that this is something that has had a significant impact. Last piece, I will say, in that study, I always kind of like laughed when people would, say bad things about the Assemblywoman or Senator Myrie in this bill. In that U.S. Chamber study, 1 in 3 adults in the United States have a criminal record. 1 in 3 adults. I grew up as a Huxtable, all right? Like my father was a lawyer, professor, my mom is an artist. I grew up, we went to Ivy League school, all that crap. I got 4 or 5 cousins or relatives that have been incarcerated. It happens to everybody. It impacts everyone. And I think that's why this bill was so important. So.
I love that. Donald, you're next. Donald, are there challenges that unionized workers with past convictions still face and will continue to face even after Clean Slate?
I think we both addressed something earlier. The DC 37 member that you met who was in fear of immigration status, right? Especially at an unprecedented time like this. I think the also barriers, as I said earlier, when someone who is formerly incarcerated feels like when they go for a promotional opportunity, it's a background check, their growth is in question at that point, right? Will they even seek to better themselves and do something for better for their families if this is hanging over their head? The Clean Slate Act law actually will eradicate that, right? But there's still, you think of the worker-to-worker discrimination against their coworker to coworker, right? Once they find out that this person has a conviction, right? And wanting to work around this person, right? These are real things that happen in the workplace. And so I think this law actually is a good thing where it will prevent some of these discriminatory things from happening in the workplace from worker to worker. And this is...
Thank you. Well, I have Trent join. I think thank you, Trent. I think one of the things that you're right, that unfortunately is going to continue to happen because we as a state have no control over it, is how these particular convictions, even after they're sealed, can still impact someone's ability to remain in the country. We were very clear in that Clean Slate only applied to criminal convictions in the state of New York, only applied to certain criminal convictions, most of them except for a few, and that we could not control if, let's say, for example, as part of their union job or another job, they had to run through a background check because there were federal implications to whatever that job was. We can't control that. The federal government could still access that. And so it takes us, like, let's say the world of inequality for folks who have been incarcerated is this big. It takes us about here. There's still a portion that because we're a state, we have no control over. Ideally, at some point, we'll have a different leadership nationally, and we can get more a more equal playing ground for every single person in our country. But I think we're a long way from there. My next question for Trent: you founded a very successful business that actively hires justice-involved individuals. What challenges do they face even after records are sealed, and how can we ensure that Clean Slate creates real opportunities?
Love it. So I'm gonna jump right into bias and stigmas. That's the big one, because if you really think about it, most of the employers that they work with, they have limited experience with this population. Oftentimes, all they know about it is what they read in books, what they've seen on TV. And as we know, TV is all about clicks and clickbait and get more people with eyes and ears on. So it's only going to televise the negative. And so the way they look at it, do I want these individuals who I've seen on TV stabbing individuals and things of that nature in my safe work setting? And so I think we need to, that's one of the biggest things that individuals face coming home from incarceration when it comes to employment is definitely the employer bias and stigma. I think also, but I do think Clean Slate is a step forward, and I think it creates some real opportunities. I just think, as we all said on this panel, we really need the employer buy-in from that aspect of things. I think also some of the other things that we know are oftentimes individuals who have been incarcerated for long periods of time lack the technology aspect of things. And so as the world continues to evolve and go towards technology, it's actually keeping our people like almost like dinosaurs. Like they're in this period where they have to learn all of this in real time. And as we know, technology is evolving very quickly, even for us out here. And so I think that's another really big thing that we have to keep our eyes and ears on. I'm happy that now even technology has increased in the prison system. So, individuals do have more access, but we need to assure that they have equitable access so they can stay up to what's coming. As well as one thing I've seen in doing this work is oftentimes they open opportunities towards industries as things are shifting away from that industries. It's always keeping us behind the 8 ball. And so I'm really big on talking and trying to advocate for us being involved in what's next, like so that way we have those shots.
You're not last in line.
So we're not last in line. And then the last one I would definitely say are just the systematic barriers that's just been in place. I mean, they're working and they have worked, right? And so that's why they were put in place. And so we really still have to continue to dismantle the system. And I think this act is, like you said, it plays a part, but we do know we still have a gap that we need to continue to work towards.
Thank you. So I don't make you play musical chairs for this last question. I'm gonna need you to shout the answer, because this question is for all of you. I want you to tell me, as a policymaker, so that I can keep in mind for my colleagues, as we walk through the implementation, what should policymakers be prioritizing when we're implementing Clean Slate? What should I be looking out for to make sure it doesn't get screwed up, basically?
Well, one thing that I think of when I hear, I'm sorry to jump right in, but one thing I think of is the fact that individuals aren't aware of when their records have been sealed off. So I think a process that actually helps individuals so that way they know when it's happening. And then I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
I would say
Shout it.
education.
Education.
Education for both the public, but also for the formerly incarcerated. So many formerly incarcerated, this is going to be a first time for them, and they need to know that this actually exists. What I didn't say in my story earlier, what I should have said, why I have personally.
Hold that thought. Hold on. Hold on. There you go. Hold it more.
So.
There you go.
So why I have personally been an advocate and supporter of the Clean Slate Act law. My brother was incarcerated for 27 years for a crime he did not commit. And so we hear stories that go national, right? His story wasn't national, and there's so many others like that. So from the very beginning, me being a supporter of this, I've been educating him every step of the way, and others that I may know personally, and also informing union members who I know personally, their children have experienced this. I think we need to get the word out. I'm also an executive committee member of the NAACP in the city. I do work with the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. I think the New York chapter president is here, and some of the members of CBTU are here. So we're spreading the word in different spaces, and I think coalition partners, working with coalition partners to get the word out, but education to formerly incarcerated and to the general public is key.
Thank you. I think it'll extend just a tad bit more. There we go.
as someone who's formerly incarcerated, having served almost 16 years of my life in prison, I understand fundamentally how important this legislation is, and speaking with policymakers is critically important to helping them understand what we're looking to do. What I would ask them to do is to track how many records, and I wrote this stuff down, the number of records that are being sealed, how many of those records are being sealed, tracking the changes in employment and wages, right, to determine how is that impacting folk. The occupational licenses, how many people are now getting those things as a result of this law being passed? The other thing is discrimination and complaints. How many complaints are now surfacing as a result of this law being passed? And lastly, what are recidivism rates for those who are now experiencing the impact of clean slate legislation? That's what I would talk to policymakers about.
Thank you. I don't think that it's
Try
they
to-
might, maybe.
I'm gonna try to project, okay, here we go. Okay.
That's as far as it's gonna take us.
So I second everything that the folks have raised, everybody's raised already. I think notice, making sure people are educated, have guidance on how to navigate the job search. I think also making sure that there's a clear way to review any decision that was made. For example, if someone finds that their conviction was not sealed for some reason, there should be an easy, accessible way for them to go to OCA, DCJS, whoever's gonna be overseeing that. And so that they can go in and just give their complaint so that it gets reviewed. I also think some of what decision on me. But to the extent that there's legislation that will encourage, incentivize employers to give opportunities to people who have previous convictions even before sealing, I think would push us in the right direction, because I think we need to destigmatize so much. There's so much bias, and I think to the extent that we can just show that there are people out there, yes, they may have a history, whatever the case may be, that does not mean that they're not going to be good employees, contributing members to a job, to society, to their communities. So I think to the extent that we can continue to incentivize that, and I'll stop there. Oh.
I think everybody has laid out a lot of the important things that we would say to policymakers. But what I would say to policymakers is, don't just be happy and go to sleep because you passed this bill and you got it signed. Don't think it's over, because it's not over. If we are not continuing to message this the correct way, it'll be turned upside down, it'll be turned sideways, it'll become a political football. Oddly enough, we've had this fight politically over the last year about the working class and how this group is not listening to the working class and that group is. And Donald Trump had an unusual turnout of working class individuals. Well, this is a working class bill. All right, we're not talking about people who are going to take Jamie Dimon's job at JP Morgan and now are getting a record sealed, because even if they had a criminal conviction, they would know, right? So we're talking about everyday Americans who have that everyday American job, right? So this is a bill about the working class. This is a bill about the economy. This is the bill about making our communities safer, right? So what I would say to lawmakers is, let's not forget that. Let's keep talking about this, because we saw it with criminal justice reform. We've seen it with DEI. We've seen it with affirmative action, right? All of a sudden, we've kind of went to sleep and said, okay, we did it. And then everybody else took the narrative and turned it in a way that we lost it, and we lost the people we were speaking with, because they woke up and said, yeah, that's right. That's not fair. How come I'm not getting that? And again, this is a bill where we're not giving anybody anything other than an opportunity. And that's what kind of frustrated me during this whole debate, is that's all we're doing, is we're giving people a chance. And so I think what I would say to legislators is, don't go to sleep on this, keep talking about it, keep educating, and keep pushing, because we need to make sure that we message this the right way so it doesn't get turned around.
Awesome. All right. You want to add something? Oh, well, now we have an opportunity for a couple of. Oh, go ahead.
One brief thing too, right? Consistent when we're talking about clean slate legislation, Peter Wagner and folk out of the Prison Policy Initiative put out a report about the 10 things that are impacting people negatively from an economic perspective once they're released from incarceration. So I strongly encourage folks to read it, right? This Prison Policy Initiative is 10 ways or something about how people, when they're released from incarceration, are experiencing economic inequality. Kind of dovetail with this clean slate issue. Just want to add that.
Thank you. Now is an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you might have. If you do, raise your hand, shout it out, and what I'll do is I'll repeat it here for the microphone. Tell me your name, your organization, and what question you have. And if you don't have any questions, know that we will stick around. In case you want to connect with folks, we'll take a picture. Any questions? All right. Oh, go ahead.
I actually do have a question. I have a statement and then
Shout it out,
a
baby.
question. So my name is Carrie Gant. I'm actually a board member of CCA, also community advocate. I advocated on behalf of the Clean Slate Initiative. And I want to thank you all for the work that you have done for this. I'd also ask you not to forget the small number of people that were disqualified for Clean Slate, although I wholeheartedly support the bill that in the form that it is now, because it will support so many and help so many New Yorkers. So I would just ask you not to stop. Just like Paul just said, don't stop, don't fall asleep, but let's keep pushing, because there are people that still do deserve those opportunities.
The important thing in the meantime, while we find it's expensive, but those folks still have the opportunity to do the non-automatic application process, which is much more difficult. It's not an answer, it's not a solution, but it is in the meantime while we continue to fight, at least they have that.
Yep. And so my question though is, so how do people know? So because my husband and I both advocated for the bill in our local region, so we get lots of questions like, do I check the box yes? Do I check the box no? Can I answer the can I say that that's something that you should not be asking me to employers? So I guess it goes to that education, and can we have some place, a dashboard or some information that people can access, like how this is being implemented, when they can say no, when they don't have to check that box, all of the things that people are experiencing related to this bill, like on the ground.
Unfortunately, right now there is nothing. It's part of the implementation process and the conversations that we are having with the agencies about how to get that piece. What I will say is, we've had this conversation with the folks over at Fortune and other organizations about having statewide clinics where the organization is checking on behalf of the individual, because that's the only thing that we can have right now. I will tell you, having it the other way at the beginning would have cost money, which would have delayed Clean Slate. And I think we all made a conscious decision of, we'll fix that part when we get to it, because we didn't want to delay it even more, because we knew that we'll get the agencies there. But I think it's completely right. How are people supposed to know? Okay, I'm gonna take 2 questions because it's 4:48, and you guys, what I said before, it's my birthday, so I'm leaving right at 5. Back here, and then our president.
So I'm actually responding directly to that. Is this past legislative session, there was actually an effort to pass a bill that closes one of the loopholes in Clean Slate. It's called the Maintaining Confidentiality in Criminal Records Act. And what it does is eliminates and prohibits forced disclosure of sealed records. So when Clean Slate goes into effect, if an employer asks you about or asks you to disclose, that is now illegal. And so that's one step, and I think the Assemblywoman is absolutely correct. There was an imperative to get it done, and now the hard work is like closing all the gaps so that it can work properly.
Thank you. President Carroll Mason.
So I think one of the things I wanted to suggest, is not a question per se, is in the education process, one of the things that we had done before trying to do and we call it ban the box, and stop having employers even ask the question.
But that's only in New York City for now, but yes.
No, I mean, we were trying to manage.
Oh, yes.
So what I was saying is part of the education process, when you do the implementation, is consider as part of the implementation strategy to get employers not to even ask the question. And so that while it's sealed, but because it should
That's
be,
for you, Paul, to tell your members.
Because if you've got a qualified person who's good, it should be irrelevant to the process, particularly when you're talking about people who were already working and they're trying to get a promotion. You certainly shouldn't ask it then when you've got the
That's right.
with the person in their work.
I think I saw your hand up here in the front, ma'am. You had a, yes. I saw you raise your hand, or?
No, I didn't raise it.
Okay, perfect. Of course. And then we wrap it up.
So, one thing I think all of us could be advocates in regards to that. I know I'm in a different position because I work with employers, and one thing I've been doing in upstate New York with the employers I work with is, one, I'm telling them is ban the box in the city is coming up here anyway, but we also work with them on HR hiring practices. And so one thing we tell them, the best thing you could do from the rip is remove that question. And we just had one of my mentees I'm working with, helping him get into bacon. And after he did his phone interview, he went back and he noticed that they actually had removed the verbiage asking, like saying, do you have a felony conviction or anything like that? And so we're seeing that it's actually working. And that's why I just think the more of us who are continually advocating and showing like, no, this is not the right process, we can make those changes even without the laws having to make the changes.
Awesome. Well, know that this conversation continues because the advocacy is not completed until we actually start to see the impacted folks come to us and say, I don't have a record, it's sealed, and I was able to get a job, and I was able to get a license, and I was able to get a home, and my family is doing much better. That's when we know that this starts working. I suspect it'll probably take a good year or two before we actually start seeing it, because we should start seeing the first batch of records sometime in the next year or so, and then we're gonna see the first batch of individuals who are actually able to do all of the things that they couldn't before. With that, thank you. Please be safe out there. You guys see how it's looking. Enjoy the rest of caucus weekend and be safe, yes.
Let's take a quick picture and then let's go. Yes.